Hi, welcome to today's podcast. Today we're going to speak about two fascinating subjects, psychedelic medicine and stem cells. We have the chance to speak with Dr. Michele Sara Cox, who's really specialized in that field. She's going to help us discover more about these two subjects. For those who doesn't know me, I'm Jonathan and I'm passionate about longevity and health, and I set myself a goal to help 1 million people to live a longer, healthier life. And personally, I want to ski at 95 years old, be with my loved one, and be at the top of my condition. And this is my big why I do this. And I want to document my longevity journey and share it with you. So let's introduce our speaker today. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Michele Sara Cox for our podcast. And we're going to speak about a lot of different subjects. But she's an expert in longevity medicine, and she combined traditional osteopathy with innovative treatment like psychedelic medicine and regenerative therapies. So please, Dr. Cox, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm Dr. Michelle, and yeah, thanks for having me on, Jonathan. I appreciate your curiosity in this space. I will give a small part of my journey, but as a military physician in the Navy, the last couple of years, I had the privilege to work with the Marine Corps. And most of my young men and women, they were actually interested in performing better, like not necessarily because they were sick, but actually increasing what they call readiness and their performance. And what I was finding, believe it or not, was that people were getting heat strokes and having liver failure and kidney failure. I'm like, what is going on in this super young population? And turns out they were taking supplements, like things that they found in the GNC type thing that they thought were helping their health. And so I realized, I mean, I already knew that, from growing up. My father, I would say, is my greatest influence for regenerative and longevity medicine. He's an engineer by heart. He
Oh,
introduced me to Dr. Tennant, like his philosophies and work, and like looking at cellular health from the very beginning like that.
mhm.
He's really cool. My dad, you should interview my dad, but he got me into a lot of this stuff. And so I started looking at these guys and I was like, okay, I need to be able to advise. We would have patients come in and they'd be like, well, I'm on this supplement, I'm on this, or I've heard this on this, podcast, or I've heard this, I read it in this magazine. What can you tell me about it? And I realized at the time my medical training did not give me that information. Right?
Mhm.
So I needed to adjust, and I did. And as I started diving deeper, so osteopaths, little different than MDs, DOs, we believe that the body has the inherent ability to heal itself.
Mhm.
So really, it's tuning into the power of our own bodies, right? And that any pharmaceutical that we have is already made within the pharmacy of this
Of the
body,
body.
right?
Okay. And okay, so that's a great way to I love your explanation about osteopathy. And what
Yeah.
would you say is a doctor like an MD comparable?
Well, allopathy, is different, and traditionally it's trained more on pharmaceutical drugs. This is a
Mhm.
problem. We're going to fix it with this. We're
Mhm.
now getting into where I have plenty of colleagues that are looking at things like lifestyle medicine, that are functional medicine. You might have heard about where they're trying
Correct.
to look at the root now more, and they're trying to put more of the emphasis on lifestyle and how somebody lives
Uh-huh.
and relates with others more than necessarily a drug as a solution. It's been over a decade that I've graduated from med school, but I'm hoping that the curriculums are changing now, to
Mhm.
reflect that. But
Yeah.
ultimately, I would say some refer to Western medicine as sick care. When you're sick, you go get care.
We treat you.
Whereas regenerative medicine, longevity medicine, we are looking at how can I live longer doing what I want to do? How can I age healthier? Some people call that health span.
Mhm.
So I don't want to live to 90 or 100 or 150 if I'm demented and I can't wipe my own booty, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of the mindset shift.
But it's funny because that's a mindset that a lot of people they don't have it yet, anchor, because a lot of people that I speak to, that I'm telling them, my goal is to live beyond 100. I want to ski at 95 years old. I want to be like, in the top of my health. And a lot of the time they said, I mean, I don't want to live to 100 and be sick, and they associate live longer with sick. But basically, I mean, you can live longer healthy. So
Exactly,
both can be
exactly.
achieved, but you need to
Yeah.
think out the box. You need to seek out different sources. So
And it's folks like you and me and like the people that we are around, that we're planting this seed into their seed of consciousness that it's a possibility, right? So like the
exactly.
4-minute mile, getting even faster. Every time we see humans doing this, like I
Mhm,
saw an article the other day, a woman of 101 is running marathons. You know what I'm
mhm,
saying? So when we see things like that, it becomes a new reality, right?
exactly.
And so thank you for what you do, because
I mean
spreading
that
awareness is fantastic.
That's the whole goal. So I'm documenting my health and longevity journey, and I want to share that with everyone. And I'm glad that I have you today. So
Yeah.
um, that's the whole purpose of it. I mean, it's to learn and teach and help others live longer. So
Yeah, yeah. So now I'll dive just a little bit into psychedelics and what got me into that realm. In
yeah.
addition to, and we're gonna, hopefully you sent me some awesome questions, which I'm really excited about.
Mhm,
And but just kind of giving, okay, how did you get from, we get performance medicine, maybe longevity, okay, we get that. But why psychedelics? Where
yeah. I mean,
what got
what is psychedelics? So I
yeah,
was I
so
was searching on it, and I'm pretty new about that. And it seems to me
yeah.
like, okay, so she's like a doctor treating with drug. Is it like real drug, or is it drug? So
Is it a
what
drug?
it
Yes.
is?
So really it means mind manifesting. Okay. And what they're finding. So I would say the only true FDA approved um, medicine is Spravato or S-ketamine. It's an intranasal, but ketamine is what I use, and it's
Mhm,
used off label. It is legal in all 50 states. However, there are some states and jurisdictions where things like psilocybin are becoming legal. There's a big movement to make plants in general legal. So that could be things like peyote, mushrooms. It can be ayahuasca. There's some ayahuasca churches. It can be something called Bufo, which is 5-MeO-DMT, Changa, Kana. There's many traditions across the globe that, to include here in the United States, that have leveraged medicines to help connect with the mind, body, and soul together, you know,
mhm,
um, to remove what one will say is the source of energy or the source that tells your heart to beat, Jonathan. So, religion aside,
mhm,
there's an impulse that your heart is receiving from somewhere that tells it to beat,
mhm,
right? And so to ignore that entirely as an energetic source of like, where is that information coming from and how can I connect to it more? That
mhm,
leads to more what they call dis-ease, right?
mhm,
And so what we have found, or what we're finding more holistically, whether that's relation with others, connection, whether that's relation with God as well, or source, or whatever you want to, having an internal awareness and self-awareness. By the way, that's one of the things that they found on this most recent meta-analysis on healthy aging. Self-awareness is right up there.
mhm,
These are all factors that contribute to us living vital lives. So psychedelics, what I found in my regenerative medicine clinic, or my clinic that Brian and I used to own out in New Mexico before we sold it, was I had these athletes. I had people eating really, really well. I had people who were doing all the IVs, the senolytics, the biohacking. They had their aura ring, and yet they were still stressed. Yet they were not getting REM. Yet they were, constantly it was almost like this uphill battle where every time they stopped the supplements or they stopped the infusions or whatever, they would revert very quickly. So I'm like, okay, well, what is this? Because I know it's not their food. I know it's not their movement. And I started to really understand how physiologically expensive stress is,
Mhm.
but not good stress, the fight or flight or, chronic kind of underlying stress, right? As opposed to the thrive and drive kind of stress.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So psychedelics were a way in. I'm not going to lie. It was my clients that came to me first and said, "What do you know about ayahuasca? What do you know about DMT?" And I'm like, gosh, darn it. Because that's usually what prompts me. I think all good physicians, like when we start getting asked, it's like what Keith Cunningham talks about, if your client starts asking, you need to be looking to see how you can solve this problem, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, well, I was in part of something called the Flow Research Collective. Have you heard of that before?
Oh, never
By
heard of that.
Stephen Kotler.
Okay, yeah, I
So
know Steven, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. Stealing Fire. That book is a really great book. And
mhm,
so in that, he talks about four main ways to access these flow states of creativity, of genius, of just getting in tune with creation, honestly. So that's meditation. There's some cool things that you can do for neuromodulation. There's breath work. And then the last one, of course, like when you ski, you enter a flow state, right? When people are
mhm,
playing music, they enter a flow state. And then the last one was psychedelics. And I was a
mhm.
very much a purist for a super long time.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then I used to meditate like 2 to 4 hours a day.
Oh,
And yeah, and then finally, it was a physician friend of mine who is very knowledgeable. I mean, has been studying this for quite some time, that introduced me to psilocybin, which was wonderful, which comes from a mushroom. If you don't know, your listeners don't
no,
know.
I don't know. Actually, I'm glad you know, but I'm very new about that, and it's funny that we have that conversation because one of my mentor is really into that. I don't. I cannot go into the technical words and the everything, but we had a conversation actually like a month ago, and he'd been to Mexico twice to do like ayahuasca and another type of psychedelic, but
Mhm.
it changed his life, like positively. It
Yeah.
made him more connected with himself and with the source. Actually, that's the word that he told me. So, yeah. So tell me more. I'm curious.
Yeah, yeah. So she introduced me, and then of course, a lot of it is not legal in the United States, so I had to go overseas
Mhm,
um, to experience this. And I am half Colombian, half Iranian, so I have heritage that is very rich in medicinal practices and getting into what they call non-ordinary states of consciousness. So not
mhm,
an altered state. Well, some people call it an altered state, but to me, that could be I'm drunk too. So I don't call it
mhm,
altered state, but a non-ordinary state of consciousness where we're expanding our senses. I want you to imagine, okay, your five senses, right? Like I can hear, I can see, I can
mhm.
taste, right? And feel. But which sense is it that tells you somebody is looking at you from another car? Which
Mhm.
sense is that?
Your sixth sense. Your sixth.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Right.
your intuition. It's
It's your
your.
intuition. I
I mean, it's
love it. Yeah.
yeah.
And so that word, that intuition, is
Mhm,
really what I guide people to reconnect with, because that intuition is the gateway to that infinite intelligence. And it's the
mhm.
intuition that your body is a compass and will tell you more. So like today, we can get into the details of senolytics and stem cells and have fun with
Yeah.
that, but recognize that those are just support to
Mm,
you,
mhm,
and what your greatest compass, which is this body that you're in, at least for a temporary amount of time, has a lot of wisdom within it.
mhm.
Yeah.
And you would say that like doing like psychedelic medicine or to doing like do you call that a treatment or like more like an
I
experience?
would say to you, so thank you for bringing that up. So there's three main ways that people will interact with psychedelics. One
Okay.
can be medicinally, one can be recreationally,
Mm-hmm.
and one can be kind of a religious spiritual path.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those are the three kind of main ways.
So can you repeat? The first one was
Medicinally, so like as a
medicine.
therapy, right?
Okay.
Medicinally or in kind of a medical construct, which is becoming more common in the United States and more developed countries.
Mhm.
It's also used that way in indigenous cultures. However, there is usually a spiritual component that's already intertwined with it. And then there's like the spiritual path, and then there's the recreational. And
Sure.
recreational, like if we remove any rightness or wrongness out of something, right? If we say nothing is right, nothing is wrong, it just
Mhm.
is, which is a different level of thinking for a lot of people, then,
Mhm.
yes, you're going to tend to see more harm happening in the recreational setting because there's not awareness around it. It's just like a car. A car
Mhm.
is very powerful, right? If I don't follow any rules, if I'm not paying attention which way I'm
Mhm.
going and what I'm
Mhm.
doing, I'm going to wreck that car. And
Sure.
oftentimes that's what happens in the recreational setting. Although I will say there's a lot of, um, because it is such a blooming industry, and I use that word, it was just a slip actually. In the United States, there are a lot of people coming into this space. And because there's not any well defined experts in the field that are accepted and it's still kind of taboo, it can be, for lack of a better word, dangerous to do. So I
Mhm.
do want to put some caution with that. And if you are seeking to do that, please, you can look at psychex.com. They're fantastic. I've worked with Josh and what they're doing there and connecting psychedelics today. I'm in their year-long vital program, which is fantastic for psychedelics. They're a great place to look. MAPS, which is the interdisciplinary oh, I'm forgetting the acronym, but
And
look up.
but do you know in Canada, by curiosity? I mean, first of all, is it legal in Canada to do psychedelic medicine? Or
I'm
maybe you
not
don't know.
exactly sure. I've seen a
Okay.
lot, but I'm not an expert in Canada,
Sure.
Jonathan. Sorry,
Sure.
but
Sure.
yeah, look, and that I know that certain medicines. What was I seeing? I want to say ibogaine for PTSD, if I'm not mistaken. In Canada, some people have been able to get
Mhm.
treatment from that through the medical system because they were suffering so much
Mm,
as
sure.
kind of a last resort.
But
So,
would you say we're still new? Is it like a newer
yeah,
industry, you would say, or a newer way to
abs-
treat people?
absolutely. Yeah. In Western medicine, it is. In the more indigenous, it is not, of course. But I mean, really, even in death, they're looking at psychedelics a lot.
Mhm.
I took a death doula course elective with psychedelics today this past summer, and just like being able to support someone while they're transitioning,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it's been shown as they hit what they call these mystical states, they have a
Mhm.
lot less fear about transitioning.
Sure. Wow. So I'm curious, like, can you explain me, like, what, let's say, like, how does it work? Like, first, it's always assisted. I'm sure there's always somebody that guide the treatment,
There's
or
not actually. That's what's
no?
actually a little, thanks for bringing that up. That's the way we would love it to be.
Okay.
However, ketamine, there are a lot of places that'll just put an IV in your arm, make sure that you're safe, and leave.
Mhm.
And so part of what I do is like educate different clinicians and providers. um, the National Institute for Clinical Applied Behavioral Medicine, can't believe I got that whole thing out, has this whole thing on psychedelic assisted therapy that I'm happy to send you so that you have it and you can put it as a link for people to
Mhm.
look at. And it talks about, okay, preparation, the actual session, and then something called integration afterwards that
Mhm.
happens.
Mhm.
So it's kind of moving through that state. And that's the more holistic approach.
Mhm. And just so I recall, is this legal in the US to do
So
that?
ketamine specifically is, yes,
Okay.
ketamine is. Yeah.
Okay,
And
okay,
then some people, will say that cannabis, while it's not legal in the United States, it's legal
right.
in many jurisdictions. Mhm.
Sure.
Psilocybin. There's a lot of cities now, especially on the western side of the United States, that have what they say decriminalized. So it's not technically legal, but it's not something that you'll get
Mhm,
in trouble for. And the regulation around it is constantly changing. So that's why I'm not diving into it, right
mhm,
now. But yeah.
mhm. I'm sure like one of the most question that people have is like, is this safe? You know, it,
Yeah.
can we be worse than before? Like after that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I feel that, well, if you'll give me just a moment to settle into this question.
sure.
When it comes to safety, it's just like that car analogy I gave you.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. It's very similar.
Yeah.
Can a car be safe? Yes. And there's a lot of things that make it safe or unsafe to drive.
Hmm.
I would
Hmm.
say that psychedelic medicine or plant medicine or entheogenics is another name for it. It's the same way. So
Hmm.
whether you look to an authority of a shaman or you look to an authority of a psychedelic informed, trauma informed practitioner, that is up to you.
Hmm.
But I certainly would not enter this space without learning some of the basics.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what type of mental health condition is treated with that? With psychedelic
Yeah.
medicine?
So they say treatment resistant depression, meaning they've tried several, I guess, approved things like SSRIs, Prozac, Zoloft, things like that, and they failed it.
Hmm.
That's technically what it's FDA approved for, um, which is the intranasal ketamine. But so far, everything from PTSD, OCD, anxiety, depression,
Hmm.
all of that's been treated with psychedelic medicine very,
Hmm.
very well. The
Interesting.
MDMA studies, have you heard of MDMA before? Street name ecstasy.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that one, in the studies, they showed that, over 2/3 of the participants no longer had a PTSD, diagnosis, which is like
Hmm. Which is big.
this is huge, and it was only after a couple of sessions. So that's, it's very powerful, and we need to keep studying it more, and
Mhm,
then also as a society determine, there's a lot of people that say, well, we don't want the medical firms to be the authority on this.
mhm,
So it's also looking at bringing legitimacy to it, and how does that best come through the medical field, through spiritual fields, through just everyone saying like, hey, stop making this wrong. Alcohol has way worse detriments,
mhm,
and
mhm,
it's super awful, and smoking, and yet here we are. Oh, but smoking, just 2 seconds on smoking. Tobacco, I learned the father tobacco, in the native cultures is so powerful. And so that's a beautiful example of how when we abuse it or
mhm,
separate the kind of reverence for these things, it can
mhm,
become harmful.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I really, I mean, everything is in the, how do you say that correctly in English? It's like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that if you abuse of it, I mean, if you drink one glass of wine, I mean, it's gonna be fine. But if you drink the whole bottle, then it's another story.
Right.
So, but yeah, I'm very curious. Like, do you have any personal? And I mean, I was not planned to ask you that, but I'm curious. Like, do you have any personal stories or that you want to share, or that you're willing to share
Hmm.
about experience you had, or maybe some people that you know that had really like mind blowing experience?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think that for me, it's a very personal journey.
Hmm.
And I will say that it is the most potent and powerful thing that I have seen that can assist people in shifting from one pattern of being to a
Hmm.
more conscious way of being, or a more connected way of being. So I look at maladaptive, which is things that are harmful when you stack it, versus vital or life-giving. And there's always going to be ups and downs, but I really feel like this particular modality is very potent. So not a specific story I want to share other
No, that's
than,
great.
yeah, other than just saying there's a reason I continue to do this work and I continue to advocate, but also have a healthy respect, because I've seen plenty of people not be supported in a good
Mhm,
way, to include myself, after these medicines. And yeah, and so you really need to be conscious of who you connect with when
mhm.
you start to explore this space. And people feel free to reach out to me. I can put them in contact with people in their area,
Sure,
to
sure.
include Canada.
Yeah, I mean, your circle of trust is really important since we're still new in that space and there's not a lot of um, jurisdiction, or I don't know how to say that
Yeah,
correctly.
like
It's
legal
not,
framework around
yeah,
it. It
exactly,
makes it more
exactly.
taboo, which, when I started working with, like I said, different service members, and then when I got out, there were people getting testosterone from Mexico and
Mhm,
buying rapamycin from these veterinary field, like medicine things and different peptides. And so all of us doctors first do no harm.
mhm,
So what I aim to do in this space is to bring safety, to bring
mhm,
a knowledge source to them, to say, hey, let's look at this. I'm not judging you. I'm not, saying what you're doing is right or wrong. Let's try to look at a bigger picture together. Because these biohackers, we test everything on ourselves, it seems.
yeah, I mean,
You know,
sometimes,
but it's getting more and more, I guess.
yeah, people are more open-minded about
Yeah,
that. They're,
yeah,
but would you say it's for everyone, or you would say it's
no.
for specific people in some condition, or and do
Mm,
you need to be like to have a disease or to have a problem
yeah.
to do it? So,
Great question, Jonathan. I'm going to lean back into that intuition that we talked about
mhm,
earlier, and that I want to honor the intuition of each individual. And if
mhm,
you are feeling called, to ask why, and to like maybe explore that,
mhm,
with somebody who is trauma informed, psychedelic informed, because the intuition is so powerful. So if you're hearing like, boy, I'm curious, that's a part of your intuition, and just start learning, but
mhm,
I'm not going to cookbook medicine this and say, in this particular conditions, you need to do this and that. And that, that's not in alignment with how I practice.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I love to hear that. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
So, is there? So there's one more thing that I was curious. Like, you spoke at the beginning about the longevity aspect of it, and can
Yeah.
you tell me more about like how this can help
Yeah. You
people
know,
live in longer?
Yeah, I'm not, you know, I've been looking for the research on that, and I don't think that there's research yet on this. However, I will say that I can, with confidence, say that it helps with healthy aging.
Mhm,
So I'm not necessarily saying that it's going to add years to a health span or a lifespan, but to health span, yes, but that it can lead to healthier aging. I have seen improvements in the gut microbiome, for an example, with people dosing microdosing, which is a whole other thing,
mhm,
different plant medicines, and like reducing inflammation in their body when they get in a state that they can actually sleep. All these things are going to contribute to healthy aging, right?
mhm,
So, the other thing is something called neuroplasticity, which is a
mhm,
main thing where all psychedelics seem to have a pathway for that. And what is neuroplasticity? Your brain and your nerves have the ability, like that plastic, like they can move, and they can grow new connections. All
mhm,
right. So
mhm,
if I'm constantly firing and wiring one way, now all of a sudden I've been disrupted. I like to tell people, like, imagine you're stressed all the time, like, and like you go to bed stressed, and then somehow you knock yourself out with pills or whatever, and you wake up and you're like, oh, I still feel stressed. Then all of a sudden, I put you in an environment where you can actually get relaxed. Now you
Mm-hmm.
have, you used the word earlier, a new anchor point to visit.
Mm-hmm.
See what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? The body's like, oh, I've experienced bliss. I've experienced peace. That's what the power of integration is, to come
Mm-hmm. Let's
back
go back
and
home.
yeah, and let's start integrating that. Let's start supporting those new neural pathways. So one of the key elements of psychedelics is this concept called neuroplasticity. And the importance of integration is adapting these and supporting these kind of new states of being, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you have to, that's a whole other conversation, power versus force. But anyhow, this is the power of it instead of forcing it to be. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And what's the age you would say that are like w- that are that you would recommend, or not maybe recommend, but you would say that you observe as like, what's the minimum age? Like, would you say like somebody at 20 years old could do it, or is it better to wait until like you're actually like you're 30, or at 10 years old you could use it
Yeah.
if you have
I'm
PTSD?
going to
Or
say I don't know because
okay,
I don't know.
yeah.
And if it's people coming to me, I definitely look at them in an individual basis. I work with individuals, at least for ketamine, that are 18 and over, so they can have legal consent because
Mhm.
I work within a legal framework.
Sure.
However, I have heard in some indigenous cultures, it is part of their rite of passage to go using these psychedelics
Mhm.
at a much younger age. But that is not my expertise. That is not my practice. I have no
Mhm.
wisdom around that personally. So it's not something that I can openly just say, yeah, it's great for everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
I know that in terms of cannabis, oftentimes I tell young individuals like, hey, wait till your brain is fully developed,
Mhm.
like
That's
in early to mid 20s, little later for men, right? So that is something that I advocate for. And there are, like I said, there are other ways to access these non-ordinary state of conscious. Breath work is a very, very powerful
mhm.
tool.
Mhm.
Meditation is another powerful
Yoga
tool.
also.
Yoga, yeah, like all of these modalities, there's so many ways to get into kind of energetic organization, right?
Mhm.
So I would say that's for everyone, no matter what
Okay.
age you are. But then using, at least from my framework, using these medicines, I'm going to defer for things outside of ketamine to the experts that or lineages that these come from.
Sure, sure. And what's a like, let's say, what's a ketamine, you said? Like,
Ketamine.
what's a ketamine treatment looks like? I mean, how long does it take? I mean, what's the
Sure.
uh, like, where do you do that? Do you do that outside, or you do that in the? Because I heard like people they say, okay, we do mushroom in the forest, or we do it always
Yeah.
for, I don't
Yeah.
know. Okay.
It's a great question. Yeah. So for ketamine, you can do that. Most of the time, it's in a clinical setting, at least in the United States. There's recreational use, which I'm not familiar with,
Mhm.
and I don't advocate for. But
Sure.
in the clinical setting, it used to be used, or it's still used for like anesthesia to help sedate a person before a procedure. So we're not using those anesthetic doses. And then there's the intranasal that we talked about. There's at-home ketamine now. A lot of companies are providing that through little things that look like cough drops. They call them troches or lozenges that go under your mouth.
Yeah.
There's the intramuscular where it's a shot here, and then there's IV. Okay, so intravenous. And obviously, intramuscular and intravenous are going to happen in clinical settings. However, there's more and more happening in retreat settings. So, where we're taking it out of the clinic, not so much with IV, but with intramuscular, and we're combining it with other modalities like breath work, like yoga, like, mindfulness around eating and things like that.
Mhm.
So, there is a whole kind of surge going that way to bring those holistic practices in. It lasts about 45 minutes to an hour
Okay,
and
I
15
understand.
minutes.
And you
Okay.
speak with the person, or you let the person like
Yeah,
after
it
all this
depends on the
course?
dose. So there's something called a psycholytic dose, and then there's the psychedelic dose,
Okay.
So sometimes it could be just enough that you can still have a conversation, you're still in the room with me. And there's other times where if it's a higher dose, you're having what they call a mystical experience. You're not
Mm,
quite in the room, but afterwards is an opportunity to start integrating what you experience, if that makes
mhm.
sense.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks
And
for
then
sharing. I thought
sure.
it was longer. I didn't. I was expecting.
So yeah, psilocybin and MDMA and LSD. We didn't bring up LSD, not legal, but another major psychedelics. Those are like in the 4 to 6 hour range.
Mhm. And
So
ayahuasca is the
ayahuasca,
same amount.
same longer amount, but things like bufo, which is 5-MeO DMT, they're few minutes, 15 minutes. Usually people are returning to their ordinary state of consciousness within the hour. Usually there's
Mm,
exceptions to all of that and how people metabolize that as well.
mm. Wow, so much stuff to learn, huh? That's amazing.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I
yeah. But I will say this, you need to have support if you enter this space. This is where the real work gets done, if you ask me.
Mhm.
Like, so if you're not ready for the ground to shake underneath you, this is not the time for you to look into it. But if you have your supports in place and you're ready to shake the foundation of what you feel you have, be ready because there's so many people I will tell you that will remember traumatic experiences that they've suppressed and repressed, like
Mm,
rapes or just super traumatic experiences of fleeing other countries or war
mm,
things that their brain had completely forgotten. And
mhm,
then they've accessed these states and they re-experience them again. So that's
mhm,
why it's important to have people who are what I say is trauma informed to
mhm,
know how to support that, as
mhm.
opposed to like, oh my gosh, this person is freaking out and now I'm
Yeah,
going to freak out with them. That's, re-traumatization, that's called. Okay. So
yeah.
we don't want that.
No, no, for sure, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So there's so many topics I wanted to speak to you. So is it okay if
Let's
we
do the stem cells too, right?
yeah, I want to speak
Cellular
about
phase.
stem cells. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. So we'll do a
Yeah.
little shift here.
So stem cells are a very hot topic right now, and it's generating a lot of buzz.
Yeah.
So first off, so what's exactly a stem cell, and how does it heal your body? And uh, please tell me more.
Can I share my screen with you?
Absolutely, you're more than
Okay. So we
yeah.
can do a little teaching here. This is kind of the talk I give. Just let me know when you can see my mice. Can you
Mm,
see the mice?
not yet. I see. I don't see your screen. Oh, now I see it. Oh yeah, I see the
Okay,
lights.
cool. All right.
Wonderful.
Okay, great. So you can see my screen, which is really cool. Please don't make fun of all my tabs or do make fun of them, whatever. It's fine. But going on to the mice. So there's something called parabiosis studies that they started decades ago. And when they hooked up these mice, together, they found that the older mouse started to move faster through the maze, eating more, had better sleep patterns. And it was like, oh, that is probably this thing called stem cells, all right? You see it on billionaires or whatever, where supposedly people are getting plasma from young people, directly infused. And so they're like, okay, that's stem cells. So we'll talk about that. They label it here as rejuvenating factors. Okay. And then, but what was also interesting, Jonathan, was the opposite. All of a sudden, the younger mice
Mhm,
started to move slower through the maze. They
mhm,
started to, yeah, get older in age. So, what is that? Here you're going to see it says aging and immune factors. So, that's where we get into this concept of cellular senescence and aging. And
Mm.
you'll see this graph here because it can actually, even though it's not showing it, it's only showing the arrow going this way. You can actually have the arrow go the other way as well. Okay. So what are these senescent cells or senile cells, or people in the field might have heard of senolytics? They're targeted to help kill these off. Essentially, senile cells or these senescent cells are cells that should have died or been recycled, but they didn't, because usually stress is happening. Okay. So if you're going, imagine you're running this company and you have more orders that you need to fulfill. And yes, you have some players on your team that are awful, but you can't afford to get rid of them because you've got this many things you still need to do. That's why these guys hang around. Well, then all of a sudden, these employees are disgruntled. They're like, I hate working here and it sucks. And they start ruining, the kind of the work environment, right? And so even though you got all these awesome employees that are like high performing, doing well, they're like, man, Jonathan, this guy. But then eventually, because Jonathan can't fire anyone because we've got way too many orders coming in, they start pissing off everyone else. Does that make sense? And it's just like if you and I are trying to have a conversation, but then my beautiful husband, who's very loud, if you know him, and amazing, comes in here and he's like, Michelle, yay, and starts yelling. We're trying to have a normal conversation. So those are called signaling molecules talking, right? But there's a louder signal happening elsewhere. And because the body is designed to want to live, when something is loud, it's going to pay attention to that first.
Okay. Okay.
Is this flowing? Getting it?
Sure, sure.
So when we look at it, this is what's called a mesenchymal stem cell. It's the one that's most talked about when we talk about things for repairing your tissues, because it can differentiate into cartilage again, muscle again, smooth muscle, and bone. It can, turn into that. It's secreting all these different things. Okay.
So
And
MSC is what? Just so I know.
mesenchymal stem cell
Okay.
derived from the mesenchyme. So that's then able to release all these things. And I have a quick few-minute video. Forgive me, I'm going to stop share just for a moment to make sure you don't see all my other videos I have pulled up. And then it's a 3 minute video that will demonstrate what we're talking about. And you can imagine this happening it's only 2 minutes. I lied. All right, so let me get that queued up and make sure that I can share audio well. Oh. All right, so we'll pause right there. Okay, so we'll go there. This is where hopefully your beautiful editing comes into place. Advanced sharing options. I just got to make sure the audio's shared. Okay, share. There we go. Perfect.
The microvesicles.
So tell me when you can see it, Jonathan.
Not yet.
Okay.
There we go. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, there we go. See? All right. So here we go.
Are small membrane enclosed structures that are released into the extracellular.
Then there's this concept called exosomes, which people may have heard of. Exosomes are different than stem cells. So this is a cell here, and all these things that it's secreting are called microvesicles. Exosomes specifically are a very small type of extracellular vesicle or microvesicle. And you're going to see they're going to talk about that. So exosomes is another thing I commonly get asked about. What's the difference between stem cells and exosomes? The cell is the whole thing. And the exosomes are these kind of the tinier particles that you see here. So we'll continue.
Space by a variety of cell types, including endothelial cells, epithelial cells, platelets, and additionally, tumor cells. Circulating microvesicles vary widely in size, from tiny vesicles, often referred to as exosomes, that are typically only 30 to 100 nanometers in diameter, to larger structures that can be up to 1.5 micrometers across.
So that's typically the exosomes fall here,
Nice.
and then microvesicle.
It's funny
Right.
when you spoke.
Oh, go ahead, John.
When you presented the exosome, I was wondering what's the size of it. So I mean that's
Yeah.
so you can see the scale. So that's great.
Yeah.
Exosomes are generated through invagination of the cellular membrane and then released through exocytosis. Cells can also shed portions of their membrane to generate circulating microvesicles that are typically larger and more variable in size than exosomes. Once released from the cell, circulating microvesicles can be detected in a variety of body fluids, including urine and in the blood. Each circulating microvesicle contains proteins and RNAs that are representative of its cell of origin.
So that's what we were seeing here. All of these things in the
Okay.
exosomes and in the microvesicles, we're seeing these growth factors, mitochondria, even cytokines, and you can
But that's in the
tell
blood cell. That's in the
It-
not in.
in those little packages, in the little exosomes. And so this is then going to give it's conversation, it's talking, it's letting you know, okay, this needs to go here, this needs to go there, or I'm a cancer cell, as you'll see here.
Including surface and cytoplasmic proteins, messenger RNA, and microRNAs. It is also known that circulating microvesicles are capable of transferring their contents to other cells, a process that is thought to be important to several biological processes, including immune response, intracellular communication and transport, metastasis, angiogenesis, and cellular survival.
So that's huge, right? So cellular survival is what we were talking about. Like, are they getting the signals to be recycled or to die or to keep living? Angiogenesis is making new blood vessels to an area, which if you've had damage, you want new blood vessels to grow in. But let's say you have something like cancer, you don't want new blood vessels
No.
there. Okay. Intercellular communication and transport is just like a interstate, right? It's happening between two things. So those cells that are being super loud and disgruntled telling us what to do, or is it the healthy cells turning because we've flooded a whole bunch of great signals into the area to say, it's okay, you can go now, you can be recycled now. We get those things in there telling us that we're actually safe. False alarm, guys, we're all good. We're actually ahead on our orders right now. Okay. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely. But who decide the message? Like, who is it? The cell itself, or it's like
yeah,
which signal to send, or like who decide that?
yeah. So there's overall, our body is mostly healthy cells. And so the idea is that if there's not a signal there, if we're actually saying, like, part of the, let me start over. The natural process is to recycle or to die.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And
The
when you
natural
recycle,
process.
where do you go?
Yeah, the recycling is like, oh, I'm going to use these proteins here or this, this mitochondria
Okay.
here, kind of thing. Like they're taking bits and pieces within
Mm.
and renewing, kind
Mhm.
of thing, right?
Mhm.
Or apoptosis, which is complete popping and dying and then broken down to amino acids and carbons and hydrogen chains and things like that, and basically getting reused.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. And so what I'll do,
Very
is
cool.
like, okay, I
Explain to
know.
the body how I mean, that's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's the body, how it's everything, how it's made, and all the
To
beauty
heal
of it.
itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can heal itself for sure.
Yeah, it really can. And so that's where, sometimes we need to support it because of lifestyle or this or that, where, we'll come in and inject it directly to the area. A lot of people, I believe you mentioned a meniscus tear. It can
Exactly.
be put right into that area to help it heal and say, hey, and sometimes it's just a matter of, do I have enough building blocks? Do I have enough fluids and substances in here to actually heal this? Because this area actually isn't very vascular, meaning it doesn't have a lot of blood flow. So in these areas, they need a little bit more support over time. Okay. In areas where you have a lot more blood flow, you can heal usually a lot quicker, like your lip, for an example. You cut your lip, it usually heals rather fast because there's a lot of blood flow there. Does that
Mhm.
make sense? And then
Mhm.
there's tissues, where people sprain, where they tear things, and you see these little nerve endings. So I'll do a procedure where it's kind of like prolotherapy, where we're breaking up that scar and we're reintroducing fluids, essentially like a saline mixture with the stem cells and exosomes in place, which is really cool. So you can put this in like torn hamstrings or partially torn
Mhm.
rotator cuffs, or, even around the tendons and ligaments around the knees. So I always like to review the difference, like tendons connect muscle to bone and ligaments connect bone to bone. So that's the difference between the two. Um, but yeah, it's really amazing to support the body because again, we want to live long and you want to be able to ski. And that
I-
means you're going to be able, to play more. Now we have great tools to support you longer to
Mhm.
play. All
Mhm.
right. Let me see what this next slide. Oh, these are the different things that lead to cellular senescence. So kind of beyond the scope of this talk today.
Mhm.
But we talked a lot about chronic inflammation, nutrient signaling dysfunction when we have issues with our gut, our mitochondria start to shut down, DNA damage for various reasons, telomere erosion, epigenetics, which is really, really huge, like what genes are turned on and turned off, like why, for an example, Wim Hof and his twin are different, right?
Mhm.
That's going to be like a lot of epigenetics, protein dysfunctions. And then, of course, after a while, stem cells die. But even in older individuals, we still have stem cells circulating. They're just kind of dormant or not quite sure where to go, if that makes sense.
So it might be a stupid question, but I'm curious. Like, do we have all stem cell in our body, like in every age, or do we stop to have
Yeah,
stem
yeah.
cell in our life?
I
Or
wish I had that chart for you. I don't have that, but yes, you continue to have stem cells. I want to say it's documented at least until your 60s, 70s. It, of course, it drops,
a
but
drop?
but yes, you still have
Mhm.
stem cells there. And so there are different things to help stimulate them as well.
Mhm.
And things like quercetin and resveratrol help kill off are in this kind of senolytic field, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So there's different ways to support the
So,
body.
and so stem cell, like there's different ways so you can take your own stem cell or you can take the stem cell from somebody else. I mean,
Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
difference, and in which scenario you should use from somebody else versus you?
hmm I love that question. And I'm probably going to go back to my presentation a little bit
Mhm.
because I did find a difference in my clinical practice. Now, again, more and more studies are emerging. There are people that pull specifically from themselves. The reason I don't particularly advocate for that is there's not a good way to separate these. Does that make sense? So,
So
meaning
I don't
if I take
I don't
stem
really
cells,
understand.
okay, so if I, let's say, so fat derived is a common way to do this.
Mhm.
If I take fat from an older person to get their stem cells.
Mhm.
Okay. In the way I logically think is if they're older, they're already going to have other dysfunctional cells and signals in there. Okay. And that's why I don't particularly advocate for that, because there's probably some, I don't want to use contamination, but aging already present there. Now granted, it is helpful to put this stuff in here. A lot of people have great results with that too. But for me personally, and what I advocate for, or the products that I use are from the umbilical cord, something called the Wharton's jelly.
Okay.
The Wharton's jelly. And I do like a minimally manipulated, meaning I don't like the stuff that's already been separated, the stem cells separated, the exosomes, because I like it more complete. So I'm going to have kind of all of this stuff, plus in that little video that you saw, all of the, I guess, the factors to support, well, it's not quite here, but it's showing in the background, all the factors to support the structure of it growing too. Okay. So some may call that extracellular matrix, that it'll have that extracellular matrix because quite frankly, Jonathan, the science hasn't caught up with everything that's in there. And I already trust whoever made us is giving us more of a complete package than something that we scientists are pulling apart and saying, oh, it's this. It's typically a more holistic thing, right? So that's my intuition and how I practice.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I would rather. I mean, the goal is to have the body to heal by himself, but to kind of boost him, I would say, or to kind of help him with newer cells. But like, so in your practice, you don't take the stem cells from the, let's say, if I'm coming to your practice, you will not take from me, you will take from a stem cell bank, or like where do
Correct.
you,
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's a big, yeah,
how do
absolutely.
they conserve that? Like, what's their process to make sure like it's good, it's well
It's
done,
all
it's safe?
FDA. Let me see if I have any sheets laying around my office here. I don't. I think I have them all in my other office. But yeah, it's all FDA regulated. So just like blood and organ donation and all of that is regulated by the FDA. There's certain tests they have to test for all these different diseases and things like that, and it has to be stored a certain way. These places are regulated by the FDA, inspected by the FDA, and it's exactly what you talked about. It's a tissue bank donation. You can't, people that donate are not paid. These are from healthy patient donors that were screened beforehand. Yeah, because imagine if they started paying for kidneys or paying for hearts or livers, or we would have a whole black market of issues, right? So it has to come from like healthy donor patients. These are all
Okay, so
donors.
I could do it. I could be a donor, for example, like to.
Well,
I mean, I could.
for your organs, yes, if you were no longer using them, or
I'll keep
some
them.
people donate bone marrow, for an example, or plasma or a kidney even because they have another one, right?
Yeah.
As adults. But for the most part, these what we're talking about for stem cell therapies are coming from the umbilical cord.
Oh, okay. Yes. Sure. Sure.
The
Sure. Sure.
umbilical cord,
Yeah.
something called the Wharton's jelly.
Mm.
That's where it's derived from. So not from the baby, not from the mama, but
Okay. Okay.
from birth
Thanks for the
products that
explanation.
would, huh?
Yeah. Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah, sure, of
To explaining
course.
that, because
Yeah,
when you say that in my mind, they cut it and then they remove
the
the
umbilical cord.
umbilical. Yeah. Exactly. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah,
it's like
because
a
normally
gym.
it's discarded. Normally it's thrown away, you know.
Sure.
So yeah. So that's what is these
Okay.
tissues being donated.
Okay, so you take that, and it's basically, is it like a, how does it work, like the procedure basically? It's always
The-
depending of the what you want to achieve, I guess. But let's say, for example, I have a meniscus tear.
yeah.
I mean, I would I would be the therapy, not the
Yeah.
therapy. I
Yeah.
don't know
So
in English.
no, I get it. I think I
Like
understand what
treatment,
you're asking.
basically.
Like, what does the process look like?
Yeah, exactly. Is it like
Yeah.
exactly? You
So,
need to do it once, twice?
yeah,
Is it
great
a shot?
question. Yeah, it's a
Is it like
shot.
me?
Yeah. I wish I had needles here, but I do have a need. Let's just pretend with my hammer here. But so essentially at first, for me personally, I always require somebody to have an x-ray within the last 2 years. I'm just ruling out any issues with the bone itself. And then I use ultrasound guidance to look at these different ligaments and tendons. And then with the needle, let's say for most people actually have damage with the medial meniscus or the meniscus on the inside, will come in. And there's several ways that lots of doctors do this. I'm going to tell you what typically gets done is they go into the joint space right here,
Hmm.
into the capsule, and they inject and they leave. Okay. The way I do it is I go in, I inject some of the product there, and then I do something called prolotherapy, where I go in directly into the tissue itself and I inject it into wherever it's needed, into the
Hmm.
actual location.
Yeah, I heard
So
about that term, but I didn't really know what it was. So.
yeah. So prolotherapy is normally a mixture of like an anesthetic like lidocaine and some sugar and some salt water type stuff to try to get your body to pay attention to that area and send blood flow there. So I use that and I combine it with regenerative products or, things that are like stem cell exosome derived
Mm-hmm.
from the
And
worm side.
the number of shot or the duration, is it depending of
Yeah, so some are
this?
one and done. I would say that doing for maybe people that are more severe, it also depends on how active somebody is.
Mhm.
So I would say plan for 2, possibly 3 injections over a year and a half.
Okay.
But don't be surprised if you're fine after one and you
Mhm.
don't need it till later. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. Yeah, like so many of the people I've done this procedure for have not needed further injections.
And after the injection, do you need to be 2 weeks without any, you cannot walk, you cannot
Sure.
run, you cannot do
No,
anything? Or what's the,
motion is lotion, is what I tell people. So basically, in that first week, we're going to advocate just for walking, and then after the second week, you can increase your. So basically, I give a return to play, and for everybody, that's different. So,
Mhm.
for an example, I just had some ladies fly in from out of town. They're in one was in their mid 70s, and one was in her late 60s. Um, their return to play is going to be different than you that likes to ski. And
Sure.
once you're in season, off season, this is an off season thing that you want to do, generally. However, I have treated skiers that tore their hamstring, and then I'll say, hey, try to not do this for 4 to 6 weeks, is usually what I say. And they're back on the slopes within 10 days and
Yeah.
did fine. But, and they did fine. It was amazing. But it really depends on a person's ability to heal.
Hmm. And everybody is different. So,
Yeah,
and
their
I mean,
lifestyle.
I have like a fear inside of myself, like, okay, can I be worse than I am right now? I mean, for example, and that's maybe a egocentric question because of
Sure,
the podcast, but I'll ask it, So,
sure.
um, for example, when I had last year my ski injury, my ski accident, then I went to see the doctor, and obviously, like the when you talk to the doctor, what they want to do is to operate you, like to make
Mhm.
to
Yeah,
cut it and to do the
surgery.
operation.
Right,
And I don't want to do that,
right.
and I don't feel it's needed, but because I was scared basically to be worst.
Yeah,
So
which is
I'm
your
wondering with stem cell, I mean, can we be work? You know, can it turn south and like I don't know, like then and it endure more after? You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I'm
that's
just trying to.
a great question.
I'm
So
sure a lot of people are asking themselves these. You know, they heard about stem cell, they would like to do it, but they're scared. So what would you,
yeah. So
you
one of
know?
the biggest questions I get, several big questions that I'll address. Will it grow a tumor? No, it hasn't been seen to do that.
Mhm,
Two, can I get cancer from it? No, also no. An autoimmune reaction, like, you know how you heard of people rejecting different organs? The
mhm,
way that the immune cell, like it hasn't developed those immune signalers at the stem cell level. So no, there is no like um, fear of rejection of these cells. Um, with every procedure, there's always something called risks and benefits. So the
mhm,
risks for this are damage to surrounding structures, although that's not as likely because, at least for those of us that use ultrasound guidance, we're able to see where we go. And it's something much, 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 much smaller than this needle. You know, this is something I test for like kind of people's sensation. So the damage from, like, let's say a scalpel cutting through you
mhm,
versus a tiny, tiny needle is a lot less. Okay.
mhm.
Infection, that's always possible. We do things in a sterile field. And the big risk is that it doesn't work.
Okay.
And so that's it, you know, but I've yet to see it not help.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
I have
mhm.
never, gratefully, seen it where it made it worse. Now, I will say this for people that do something called platelet rich plasma, PRP.
Yeah, I heard about that. I was
Yes,
about,
I have seen people feel worse for a bit after that because, again, they're pulling blood from that older person, whatever lifestyle, whatever
mhm,
issues. And I used to actually do this after I optimized a person. I used to do this, but only after I optimized them and I could tell serologically or what was happening in their blood. Um, I would pull it because I wanted something for the stem cells to grow on. But then when this company started making this newer product, or they start talking about this protein rich product that is far less expensive and it works magnificently, and I don't have to worry about if that person's in an inflamed state or not. But yes, oftentimes I would see people with its swollen joints, not in my practice, but in other people's practice. And they would be like, oh my God, last time I did this, my knee was swollen for like, you know, several days and weeks, and it felt worse. But
mhm, mhm,
gratefully, I never experienced that with my clients because, like I said, I
mhm.
would optimize their blood milieu before I would pull PRP.
Sure, sure. Oh, it's good to know. And so I had meniscus tear. What other injuries or what other treatment, you know, what other type of accident or could you heal with stem
Yeah.
cell?
So with stem cells and exosomes, there's actually a lot because you can infuse these too. And I mean, basically, like any joint, any tissue, back pain. There's even some newer studies and companies right now that are using something called TMS, which will, and an ultrasound basically too, to help direct the stem cells into damaged parts of the brain and
Okay.
exosomes too, you know. So the I don't do that specifically, but this is a very emerging field as well.
Mhm.
Um, that's gaining more and more traction. Places like the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic now offer things like stem cell injections into the joints and stuff. So it is being more widely adopted and studied.
Exactly. And yeah, we see more and more clinics and people doing that. And I'm curious, like, how do you how do you make sure that the person or the place where you go are, how can I say, are doing it in the right way, you know?
Mhm.
Um,
Well, at least in the United, I mean, gosh, um, this is okay. This is the analogy that popped in, like a plastic surgeon. You know how plastic surgery has a lot of art in the way that it's done? and it is FDA approved, right? You know,
Uh-huh.
like people can go, but maybe if they see plastic surgeon Jonathan, the results are going to be different than plastic surgeon Michelle,
Okay.
right? So
Absolutely.
I would say it with that same intention and approach of research, right? To look at other clients, say, the testimonials. Gratefully, there's things like Google reviews nowadays too, which you can't always rely on that. But like just, and also the feel, again, go back to your intuition. Something about this dude just ain't right, or this gal, I'm not feeling it. Then don't go,
Mhm.
because there's something there that you're not sure. But the idea is the place clean? Is it sterile? Like, do they know what they're talking about? Can they explain this to me? Because let me tell you this,
Mhm.
there's plenty of people that will go somewhere, get it done because somebody said so and so couldn't explain it. But really, they need more support. They need more conversation, to happen. So I think bedside manner and like, do I actually, like, if I have trouble, will this doctor actually help me afterwards? That's a good question. Like, what is the support like afterwards? And do they have a plan or not? Don't worry about it. Yeah, you're good. You're good. And I've seen that over and over kind of thing.
Mhm.
So those are the things that I look at personally. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of variety. And
Mhm.
I will tell you, there's a lot of doctors with different opinions than me, so
Mhm.
see
Yeah.
what resonates with you the most.
Absolutely. And do you have a clinic right now, or because
Yeah.
I? Okay.
Yeah, I have so this is my at-home office that I have a bunch of
Mhm.
things because I do a lot of telemedicine consults, and then my clinic is on Hollywood Beach itself.
Oh, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful, amazing, amazing. So, I was curious, like, what do you see a big like in the future, like with longevity and stem cell? Do you see like a link with people, like it's going to help them to live longer using stem
I
cells?
do. I really do. But there's also a lot of emerging technologies, Jonathan, that, I think you sent me the thing with Scott Tennant yesterday, like
Mhm.
looking at that cellular energy level and repairing that, which is really amazing. So there's things like the biocharger, there's
Mhm.
different devices that are coming around in addition to this that are going to support um overall cellular energy, our overall vitality. I think stem cells and exosomes are just a tiny
One
portion.
part of it.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Wow, that's wonderful. We cover a lot of stuff today. I don't
Yeah.
want to. I could speak to you the whole day, but I want to respect your time. Um, so Dr. Cox, for the audience, so who's motivated to live past 100 years, is there what would be one action that you think people could do to help them in their longevity journey?
Okay. If I have to pick one, get to know the sun.
Mm,
If I have to pick one, get to know the sun. And what do I mean by that? That
mhm,
means get your biorhythms synchronized to that of nature and the earth. And that's, your sleep, it's going to impact your sleep. So sleep is obviously foundational, but
mhm,
start paying attention because the light energy that the sun emits has a lot of information in it for your body, a
mhm,
ton.
mhm,
And the lack of it, so don't have artificial lights when the sun is not out,
mhm.
so I would say that's one of the number one thing. And then can I give like a couple more?
Yes, but I just want to say something. So I live in Canada and we get winter here and it's pretty cold and it's cloudy and snowy. So how do we get the sun
Well,
when
you can still get, I mean, whether you see it or not, it's out
it's
there.
there?
It's
Mhm.
there, right?
So be outside
So
basically.
be outside, get outside first thing in the morning and in
Mhm.
the evening if you can do a walk, even when it's cloudy. I think I did a post the other day with the dogs and my umbrella, just trekking outside kind of thing. But yeah, like I think that that's an excellent and a fair point is that any other questions before I tell you the
No, 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 no,
Okay,
no.
yeah. So like the sleep is so huge, the sleep, because like even they're showing studies that it can reduce your testosterone by 30% if you sleep poorly. Can you
Mhm.
believe that? And that's like the number one muscle building hormone for both men and women. So like frailty, you want to stay strong. So whatever that looks like for you, walking, weightlifting, things like that. And then if you're going to pay attention to any macro, which is like, a type of molecule that you look at in your food, it's protein, track your
Protein
protein,
first.
protein, and then water. It's so simple you can put it in a copper bottle too and get some little copper in there. These are very inexpensive on Amazon. And just drink out of copper, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, I think those are my main things. But I would be remiss if I don't say this because what they're showing in these longest running studies, like out of Harvard, and the Dunedin study, is your social connections. So
So important.
yeah, social isolation, they say, is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow. Wow.
15, almost a pack of cigarettes a day, social isolation. And they're really seeing the impact of that after COVID too. So having strong social networks, oxytocin is something that's released when we're in love, even petting our pets, those are all things that are going to help. But remember, it's a holistic thing. It's never just one thing.
Absolutely.
But I think those are my main tenets of healthy aging.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing all of your information. And I feel your heart is very, very beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Cox. So where can we find you? If you
Yeah,
want
so
to-
you can go to, thank you, Dr. Michelle Sara with one L, no Helen Michelle, I like to say, Michele, Sarah, SARA, .com, drmichellesara.com, LinkedIn, another great place to find me. And then Instagram, my handle is Dr. Michelle Sara. TikTok, I think it's that too.
And I'll make sure to include them in the description below. And thank you so much. Thanks a lot. So thanks a lot for watching the podcast today. If you have any comments, please leave them below. It will be amazing to get your feedbacks, what you like, what you would like to hear most. Is there any concept or things that you would like to have it more details? And we'll make sure to answer all your questions. Please follow our YouTube channel. It will be amazing. And I wish you to live a longer, healthier life. And I wish you the best. Thank you so much.